Chapter 5. Aloneness. I camped alone for the better part of a month. Grandfather had gone deep into the southern part of the Pine Barrens to visit an old Native American friend, and Rick was away with his family for most of the summer. Certainly I'd camped many times alone before, but this was the longest I'd gone without seeing another person. For about the first week, it was so good to be alone. I had no one to please but myself, and I could practice my skills endlessly without having to discuss what should be practiced with Rick. There is also that timelessness that occurs when one is alone. I was governed now by my own internal clock. Time becomes only necessary when other people are involved. So, too, was there a profound freedom that comes with the aloneness, a freedom to do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. However, after the novelty of the first 2 weeks of being alone wore off, I began to feel very lonely. I had accomplished and witnessed so many things that I wanted to share them with someone, but there was no one there. At first, the feeling of loneliness only hit me around the fire at nightfall, a time when we would normally share things with each other. Then, as the days passed, the pangs of loneliness would become more frequent, especially in the quiet hours. After dark, the loneliness became acute. I found myself doing things just to keep my mind off my loneliness and on other things. The skills I began to practice became more involved, requiring more concentration or physical performance. So too did I find myself talking to myself out loud just to hear a human voice. Now going well into my 3rd week alone, I began to feel a prisoner of this aloneness. I thought frequently about going out of the woods and heading back home for a while. I even considered going to one of the closer houses just to watch people for a while. My conversations with myself were becoming rather lengthy and complicated. I even began to answer myself, frequently thinking out loud. After a while, all I could think about was how alone and abandoned I felt. The loneliness saturated my every mood to a point where I could think of nothing else at all. I so desperately wanted to share so much of what I had done over the past several weeks with someone, anyone. At this point, I began to doubt myself. I thought that if I were ever to understand what Grandfather did, I would have to love to be alone. Right then, I hated it with a passion. Grandfather so often told me how important extended periods of aloneness would become to my development, not only in survival, but especially in the physical spirit. Aloneness and asceticism are part of the person's spiritual teachings, and without that, one can only understand the truth. This really bothered me. Somehow, the world of spirit would drive me away. They seemed to be somehow using my isolation and loneliness as a leading device. It was like some kind of test that I had to pass. I knew that this should be an easy and much welcome process, but the aloneness and isolation became profound loneliness. I became so disgusted with myself for feeling this way. I felt unworthy, for loneliness did not seem to be part of Grandfather's consciousness. Finally, on the first day of the 4th week, I decided that I could take no more and began to pack up my camp. I would just go home for a few days and then come back to the woods after I'd gotten enough company. Just as I put all my things in my cache, I looked up with a start. Grandfather was sitting at the edge of camp watching me. At first I felt overjoyed to see him and wanted to run right over to him, but this feeling was soon supplanted by the feeling of guilt. Grandfather knew that I was to be alone for at least 4 weeks. In fact, he had advised it, but now I was leaving early and felt very embarrassed for giving in. He kept watching me with a half smile on his face, though there was no accusation or disappointment to be found in his eyes. He said nothing, but just motioned me over to sit down. I approached him humbly, feeling that in some way I had disgraced him and myself. Without waiting for me to ask a question, he said, "I was expecting this time." I was shocked by his statement me from the woods. I told him then that I felt like I had dishonored him in some way, but I just couldn't take being alone anymore. I felt that the loneliness was getting in the way of everything else, and because of the loneliness, I did not feel myself worthy of a spiritual path. He then said, "There is a vast expanse of must find a difference. We all must face that question someday. With those words, he began to tell me the same things. Grandfather said that he had been wondering for certainly he must have been He was just too deep in the trackless wilderness of Canada, where few, if any, people ever ventured. In fact, during that time, he rarely even found a track or any other evidence of another human. It was then, in the beginning of this long period of asceticism, that he would have to face the demon of loneliness. Grandfather said that the loneliness and oppressive isolation did not hit him all at once. Instead, it was a gradual process that overtook him slowly. At first, he found that many of his questions were going unanswered. He yearned for the elders, needing their advice many times, but he knew that there would be no way he could get to them. His feelings of being isolated and abandoned were especially intense at night, but soon they even intensified during the day. It was not so much that he missed people in general, for he had always avoided people outside his own tribe. He just missed his family and tribe. Though, after a while, he began to long for anyone to come along, even if they were in the wilderness for the wrong reasons. The need to talk to someone became a driving passion that saturated his every waking hour. Even with the passage of time and season, the feelings of intense loneliness never weakened. On the contrary, it was stronger. There was never a period of relief, not even for a moment, that shaped that horrible way. Several times he purposely meditated for no other reason than a change of scene that would take away the sting of isolation and distance. So too, his skills and disciplines that required full concentration for attention. It came to a point where he could not think or function at all without the horrible feeling of loneliness overtaking him altogether and overshadowing everything else. He knew all along that someday he would have to face that intense loneliness, and that is what kept him going, even in the deepest moments of despair. In desperation, Grandfather began to look to nature and spirit for comfort. Even there, communications were weak and after a while became obscure altogether. The piercing loneliness overshadowed everything and even excluded any spiritual conversation or understanding. Grandfather knew very well that he would have to transcend this loneliness or it would forever become his demon. It would defeat him unless he understood and finally defeated its smothering power. Aloneness was a vital part of any spiritual path, and he had to separate aloneness from being lonely, but he had no idea as to where to begin his search for answers. What had kept him going for so long was his sheer determination that even that was beginning